Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat. Nashtaprayeshu Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavate Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, Text 23 and 24. The title of the chapter is Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. I am not going to be able to share my screen. I'm on a phone in Gita Nagari, so we have limited access to internet. So I'm using my phone data, and I don't have sufficient bandwidth on the laptop. So hopefully just by hearing, without necessarily seeing the text, there's sufficient connection with the content and ability to dive into these beautiful lessons that we learn from this verse and purport. So I'm going to recite the verse. Mahattatvad vikurvanad bhagavadvirya sambhavad kriya shaktir ahankaras trividha samapadyata vaikarikas tejasascha tamasascha yato bhava manasascha cha bhutanam mahatam api. So translation and purport by Prabhupada. Translation: the material ego springs up from the Mahat Tattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. So purport: in the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as a self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of the misuse of marginal independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is therefore stated that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. This example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there's always a chance that this will happen. And therefore, one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from the material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. So, what we are hearing here is a unfolding of material nature, of the cosmic manifestation, how it comes about. I particularly appreciate our Vedic literature for this. One of the facets of Vedic literature that make it super profound and very reasonable when you consider existential question like how did creation even happen? It's a big question. How did creation happen? Or um, why we're here? How did this all happen around us? And you look around you and you wonder, here I am in a material body, in a sea of material energy. How did this happen? Scientists in recent years, in the last 100 years or so, have come up with this idea of the Big Bang Theory. But that's only in the last 100 years. For many, many centuries, the contemplation of how creation has come about has happened, and with many, many theories, often rooted in spirituality or religion. In our Vedic tradition, there's just amazing, astounding amount of detail that's presented very reasonably of how matter comes into being. And it is sourced in something that is not material, something that is spiritual, as opposed to the modern scientific, largely what people think about of the source of all matter and everything that is around us that we can see and perceive and touch and smell and those kind of things. They all sourced in primordial matter of some kind, such as a singularity. The singularity transforms and it starts to expand, and here we are. But that's one conception, that it all comes from matter. What seems to be a lot more reasonable is this unfolding of creation as described by Kapila to his mother, Devoti, in this third canto. Very detailed explanation of from the more subtle elements, the more gross elements come about. Just makes sense. From the mind, so when we see how the mind is and how the mind works, it impacts the physical body. For those that have a lot of stress, for example, they naturally get more physical ailments. For those that go through a lot of trauma, they often are diagnosed with more chronic diseases. And there's a medical doctor, his name is Gabor Mate, who's done a lot of research in this, and he talks about the state of mind and traumas that we experience in life is what actually manifests as diseases. And so if you backtrack that, if you can heal from trauma, then your diseases are less impactful. There was somebody who had fourth stage cancer and they were about to pass away. They were in hospice actually. But through some healing methodologies, through sharing the experience and having someone to talk to about their experiences as a child and so forth, where they had experienced the trauma, that person who was in hospice was able to come out of that hospice situation and live for many years later. So what we find is my point, what I'm trying to make is the fact that the subtle impacts the gross. We see that in our day-to-day life. So it's easy to extend that logic to say all of this gross matter, the whole material creation is actually sourced in something very subtle. And the Vedas describe what that subtle energies are that precede gross matter. And here we're seeing that the gross matter is preceded by this subtle energy called false ego, uh, ahankar. Ahankar, this energy is what makes everything comes into being in terms of matter. And behind ahankar, or what's the source of ahankar or false ego? Two things. In this verse, is discussed as mahatattva, the total material energy, manifested, total material energy, mahatattva, plus bhagavad virya. Bhagavad virya is the energy of the Supreme Lord, or the force of the Supreme Lord. Virya means heroism. Virya also sometimes means semen, as you might have semen, the force of a male semen brings about the birth of a child in the womb of a mother. Like that, the force of the Supreme Lord's energy brings about this material creation. And the first element that comes out is false ego, ahankar. So mahat tattva vikurvanat bhagavad virya sambhavat. And then behind that, behind mahat tattva is pradhan, as we learned in previous verses. And behind bhagavad virya is Bhagavan, the Supreme. And it's all, so we see, we have a very beautiful explanation of how subtle energies manifest the gross energies. And it's, I find it the most reasonable explanation of how creation actually happened. Otherwise, it's mind-boggling to contemplate the various aspects and the various intricacies and the mysteries of the universe. Otherwise, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But here we have a very clear picture being presented by Kapila Muni to his mother that is powerful, reasonable, logical, and beautiful unfolding of all of it. Now, it's beautiful in the unfolding and the design of it, but what's not so beautiful is the fact that this false ego, ahankar, is what binds the pure spirit soul to matter. And it's what makes each one of our pure consciousness connected to impurity and kriya, that is activity, the doership mentality, and all the pain, that the misery that ensues from it. So I'll go line by line in this verse. It says mahatattva vikurvanat. So by the transformation of mahatattva, bhagavad virya sambhavat. So mahatattva plus bhagavad virya, what happens? What manifests? Kriya shakti rahankara. Kriya shakti, one of the features, this power, this energy to do work, kriya. Ahankara is called ahankar. If you break out ahankar, it's aham kara. Aham is I and kara is do. So I do. Ahankar is thinking myself to be the doer. And it's a big illusion, as we learn in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says in third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, text 27, Ahankar vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. They think that they're actually doing, but it's not true. It's all being done by Prakriti. So that ahankar now splits into three different types. It mixes with false, so it mixes with mode of goodness, it mixes with mode of passion, mixes with mode of ignorance. So the next lines talk about this trivida samapadyata. So the three kinds of manifestations of false ego. The first one is false ego plus goodness brings about manas, or the mind. Then false ego plus passion, or tejasa, brings about indriyanam. So it's later described in this chapter that indriyanam is composed of the intelligence, as well as the working senses and the knowledge acquiring senses. So all of those are encapsulated within this indriyanam. So mode of passion plus false ego means you have the ability to do stuff with your senses, and you have the ability to receive through the knowledge acquiring senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, sight, smell, touch, etc. And then false ego plus ignorance makes up the bhutanam mahatam. Bhutana mahatam is the gross elements, the earth, water, fire, air, ether, those items that the sense objects come in touch with the senses. So the sense object, like what you can touch and what you can actually see, what you can hear, sound, etc. All of those sense objects fall in the last category of false ego plus ignorance. And then, so all of that is further elaborated by Kapila Dev, but here in this verse, it presents it in a very terse format, in a very compact format. Where Prabhupada takes this purport is fascinating, makes it very applicable to our day-to-day life, where he says that three or four times in the purport, he makes it really clear, we are pure souls. We are constitutionally and fundamentally pure souls. But that purity, just like in the previous verse, it talks about rain coming down, and that rain is pure. It's got all kinds of beautiful features to it, such as crystal clarity and not being distracted, as the verse says. And that water comes down to earth and now becomes mixed with all kinds of impure elements, be it sand, mud, it's the rocks, etc. And so that water now becomes contaminated, becomes rainwater. In fact, here I am in Gita Nagari. It's raining, and it's nice, beautiful rain. But when we see that rain come on the ground, oh my God, my car, my shoes, everything is muddy and dirty. And so when there's rain, while the rain in itself is very pure, the experience of the water on the mud makes it quite inconvenient because of its because how it becomes dirty with the mixing with mud and so forth. So like that, Prabhupada makes a very clear statement many times in the purport that we are fundamentally pure souls, but we've come in contact with material nature. Now one may ask, how did this happen? And the way he says it's pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there's a chance of forgetting Krishna. So this is the fundamental reason we are here in the material world. When I was a 15-year-old kid, I was first attracted to impersonal teachings because that's what I was introduced to. My first foray into spiritual life, I met a Mayavadi sannyasi. I was very impressed by this whole concept of detachment and, life is temporary and those kind of teachings that pervade both the impersonal and personal schools of thought were very attractive to me at the age of 15. In fact, I thought I should go to I told my parents I want to move to an ashram in Mumbai at the age of 15. My parents looked at me and thought, "You're crazy." Or they said it, "You're a little crazy. Don't do stupid things. Just you can have a spiritual life, but you can get a job and get married, go to college, do all the normal thing." And I was thinking in my mind that that's crazy actually to try to go down that path. In any case, I had this experience. I still vividly remember sitting at the feet of this Mayavadi sannyasi and saying, I had this fundamental question, why are we here? And he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're too young to understand." And that was such a disappointment. Till today, I can sense that disappointment because I wanted to know. And I respected this individual. By the way, he's the head of the Chinmaya mission now. But I was very disappointed. I wanted to know, why am I here? So after college, a crazy stint in college of doing all kinds of crazy things between Spain and the United States. I went back to my spiritual pursuits and all kinds of traditions and different explorations. Finally, I met His Holiness Rompa Swami, who is my guru now, and I asked him this question. I got the opportunity, the great fortune to meet with him, and I asked him the same question that had plagued me when I was 15 years old, and I asked him, so why are we here? Because I want to know. I had that contemplation when I was 10 years old. I remember thinking, am I God? And I figured, no, I'm not God, because I would have realized it if I were God. So I made that conclusion when I was 10 years old, that I'm not God. But I really wanted to know a reality, and why am I here, and what's the purpose of life? And all those questions, existential questions, were deep within my heart. And I remember visiting my cousins in India at the age of 12, 13. We would sleep on the terrace, as they would sometimes do, because lights would go out in India, stare up in the sky, look at the stars. And I would talk to my cousin, say, what makes us be? Like, how in the world did we come to be here? And what is the purpose of all of these stars? And, so these kind of existential questions were always in my consciousness. And then, so when I asked Maharaj that question, why are we here? It was the first time he very patiently took time to answer that question. I remember devotees were asking me we were sitting at Maharaj's feet, my wife and I at the time, talking to about this question, and there were some devotees shooing us away, saying, go away, don't bother Maharaj. But it was something that was so important to me. So I just sat and listened to him. And then he asked me, do you know what ontological means? And I said, no. No, I said yes. I pretended to say I understood it, but I didn't really understand it. Then he, I don't know, figured out that I was not being truthful, and said, ontological means something that's beyond space and time, something that's beyond what we perceive in our normal consciousness in this material world. So he says, ontologically, we made this decision to separate ourselves from the Supreme, that then led to a series of material manifestations, where finally we have this material body. So here, the science of that answer that I received when I was 21, 22 years old from His Holiness Ramapal Swami is being discussed here in the pulpit, where Prabhupada says, originally pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, ontologically we made that choice to separate ourselves from Krishna. Then we forget Krishna, and then this whole sequence of events happen, and here we are with material bodies, with a material mind, with all kinds of conditioned tendencies and weaknesses and attractions and repulsions and our favorite attachments. And gosh, the web of illusion that we might find ourselves in is overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. We try to take our consciousness to Krishna. And our japa practice is our fundamental process where we see how the free will that we have at the very core of our consciousness, the free will, is misguided, misused, and it goes all over the place. Even when we want to chant and we have this mild desire, let me be in relationship with Krishna, and that mild desire is impacted by all kinds of distractions. And the foundations of those distractions is this misuse of free will. It's foundational, it's very deep. So the whole sadhana process that we've been given is, externally, we check the box. Yeah, we chanted 16 rounds. Externally, we checked the box. We attended Arati. Externally, we checked the box. We read the Bhagavatam, we read third class, etc. We can check these boxes, but the sadhana process is to go so damn deep to adjust and I would refine this will that we have at the soul level, that will that to serve Krishna, to please Krishna, That's that's what sadhana practice is. It's to do activities, no doubt, but those activities are to help us at a very, very subtle, deep level where our consciousness shifts towards, I want to please Krishna. And the large part of the message of this purport that Prabhupada spends so much time to train us actually is that keep in mind that choice at that very deep level, at that free will level, is always available to us. And in fact, it does get exercised because Prabhupada says is very practical. How does he say? Yeah, this is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances where someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. Here we are in Gitanagari, and I've been coming here for 21 years by great fortune. This is where my commitment to Krishna consciousness as a practice actually became solidified. And here, every time I come, there's always like a revolving door. Some devotees come for a few years, for a few months, for a few weeks, and then leave. So just yesterday, I was talking to some of the devotees who've been here for a few years, and they were sharing how some major changes have happened in the farm in terms of the devotee makeup. Some have left Krishna consciousness, some have moved to the service to a different place, but some have left Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada saw that during his time. People took up sannyas and seemed to be super dedicated, but then all of a sudden dropped out. So Prabhupada says this is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. And then the example of the razor is given. That just as when you're shaving, and I know I've had this experience, probably others have had too, when you're shaving, you can easily, if you don't pay attention, you can easily cut yourself. Similarly, with the practice of bhakti, we have to be very careful. And Madhurya Kadambini, for example, gives us a lot of beautiful detail of the booby traps, if you will, along the path of Krishna consciousness. There are there are things that can attract us and as a consequence detract us from Krishna. And we've got to be really careful about those booby traps. Even great demigods, the Bhagavatam says, even great demigods are sometimes misled. We see in Shabari Muni, he just sees, gosh, he's spending time underwater and so many years of penance, and he sees two fish copulating, and that was it. He wanted to go marry 50 daughters of the king. Vishwamitra, I was telling this example to some students a few days ago. Vishwamitra, he just hears, he doesn't even see anything. He just hears the ankle bells of Menaka and he becomes bewildered and attracted and distracted from his practice of austerity. So the bhakti process, there's a beautiful verse that I chant to offer to Lord Chaitanya. It says, is actually composed by Prabodhananda Saraswati. It says, Kala Kalir Balin Indriya Vairi Varga Shri Bhakti Marge Akantaka Koti Ruddha. That says, Shri Bhakti Marg, this Marg of Bhakti, this path of Bhakti, Iha Kantaka Koti Ruddha, there's millions of thorns on this path, actually. Aha Kvayame Vikalah Kimaham Karomi Chaitanya Chandra Yadi Nadya Kripam Karoshi. Where he says that unless I have the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, I have no way to pass this path without being affected by it. So our journey in Krishna consciousness can be fraught by many difficulties and obstacles and thorns along the way. And it can manifest in different ways. And like I said, there's a whole science to it that we don't necessarily have time to discuss in great detail. But there are points at which we've got to be really careful. In fact, we've got to be really careful all throughout careful. We've really got to be careful about certain points in our life. For example, Tarangarangini in the Bhajana Kriya stage. Tarangarangini can be this thing that attracts us, some slight benefits of bhakti. We might get some labha, puja, pratishta, which is we get a position, we get some fame, we get some um, wealth, some benefit. People give us gifts, etc. We've got to be really careful about these things. That we get attracted to it and then fall off the path of bhakti and we forget the real purpose of it. So Prabhupada becomes really strong in both of these paragraphs in this verse that we've got to be super careful because our false ego can inflame at any time and we can get deviated from the path of bhakti. And the way to be protected, largely, like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expresses in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, the way to be protected is to stay within the association. And association meaning to have association really means having one, two, three, four, not more than five necessarily, very close devotees with whom we can share our hearts and who we hear very confidentially, we have trust in, that we can talk about stuff and gain some support and love and affection, and we need that. Mitharatir mitatushtis, nivritta guna atmanai. That in the 11th chapter, 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, the sages, the Nava Yogendras described that we need to have this mitaratir mitatushti, that one within one another have rati and tushti. We have attraction, we have satisfaction by discussing Krishna Katha, and we help each other to overcome our weaknesses. And that's the precursor to actually making super great advancement to get to bhava and prema stages. This is discussed in the 11th chapter, 3rd canto. 11th canto, 3rd chapter of the Bhagavatam. So the protection to stay within the realm of pure bhakti, not just any bhakti, not mixed bhakti, but stay within the realm of practice of pure bhakti, is to have that powerful association, to have intimate relationship with one's spiritual teachers and friends in Krishna consciousness. All right, so I'll pause there. It's 8:04. Anyone would like to share any comments or thoughts? It's a very, very deep verse, very applicable to our spiritual lives.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol.
Thank you so much. I know, nice class. It looks like this free will. I mean, I'm just trying to think a couple of things, Prabhu. I think the whole thing that you mentioned, it looks like the free will, the living entity he is having is a problem, right? Because I was just thinking, even the examples you gave, Vishwamitra and all, right? They were very serious in their practices. I mean, maybe not directly bhakti, but even for a bhakta, right, who is sincerely trying to practice, these deviations that can come if one is not very you protection. I mean, keeping the protections, right, that you mentioned about it. I mean, we need to be very careful because it can deviate us at any time. So I was just thinking, I mean, it is going to be there all the way until one reaches to the top. I mean, Bharat Maharaj example, right? I mean, we Bhava stays until he reaches there. Still, he had to take the next life because he has some thing that he did which he was not supposed to do. I was just thinking, right? So I mean, it is like because they were all very serious. I mean, even the he's a bhakta, right? So I mean, still it has to, it is a problem. So I was just thinking, it looks like this people is a problem there. So I know it is not, but that is the living entity has it. So maybe if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, it's a common question. Somebody may say, why did Krishna give us free will? Just take away free will. Then we don't have to have this problem. I think that's where you're going with this.
Yeah, that is the right question, but yeah.
Well, I mean, then the next question is, okay, why we exist at all? And the answer to that question we understand, according to our understanding, is that Krishna, in the Bhagavatam, it expresses that Krishna wants to have loving relationship. That's what the Supreme Lord wants. And you can't force love. Love is not a forced thing. Love is voluntary. And so as soon as you say love is voluntary, that means there's free will. So you take away free will, then there's no love to experience, right? So you can't love your computer. Some people try. Nowadays, artificial intelligence, they they have they have ways of chatting with you like as if you feed to artificial intelligence a whole bunch of personality traits, and they can the chat bot can chat with you as if they're your partner. So let's say you lost your partner, they died or whatever. That chatbot can talk to you like as if they were a partner based on that person, all kinds of features or aspects of their personality. But you can't really love a computer in one sense, um, because it's not animate. There's no free will involved in the computer. So free will is necessary for the experience of love, and our existence is for Krishna's experience of love and for our experience of love. So that's the purpose of our existence. And if we have free will, means we can choose not to love. And here we are. We chose not to love Krishna. So here we are suffering in the material world. It's a prison house for confinement and for correction, to remember, oh, maybe I love Krishna. That would be way more congenial for me. Love Krishna. So you can't remove free will. If you remove free will, you remove existence in one sense. So the purpose is love. The purpose of free will is for love. That's my thought. That's my thought on it. What do you think, Prabhu?
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. I know there won't be, I mean, a technical answer, a logical answer to this, right? Because it's going to be loop. So, but I
Yeah,
think, yeah.
Vishaka, iPhone.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Srila Gurudev.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, the question is not related to the class. I'm sorry, it's something different, and that is like disturbing me. So I thought I will bring it up in the Association of Devotees. So I was just wondering, like, how do we see the things those are going on around us currently, and especially like I think devotees would be aware of what happened in Kashmir, Pahalgam, um 2-3 days back, and it's like sometimes it seems like our existence is really threatened, and I know our feel there is a feeling of hopelessness also, like what can we do, and we just sit there and do nothing, and at the same time disturb. So it's really hard to process things. Like, I know the preaching is the essence, but the thing is, if we are not there, then who will preach? The way, we are disappearing from the face of the earth. So it's like a little scary. And at the same time, I heard in so many podcasts, Dharma Rakshati Rakshita. So in Bangladesh, we see devotees were getting killed and all the abominable things were happening with them. I just don't know how to process. Logical mind tells me all those things, but when the emotional mind comes, then it's hard to process things.
Thank you for sharing. I hear you. I mean, it's on so many levels. It's confusing, hopelessness giving. It's hard to integrate message we've heard with what we see in real life. For example, we hear that devotees are protected by, but then we see in this case they weren't necessarily devotees; they were just tourists in Kashmir area, but nonetheless, perhaps innocent. So it's very bewildering. You can extend it to mass murders in the United States. The shooting of innocent children in schools. You can extend it to earthquakes happening in, where was it, was it Syria? Tens of thousands of people died. Ukraine war, Russia, and how many devotees? I know some devotees, Ukrainian devotees, who lost their parents, lost their home, everything got completely demolished. And how should those of us in the confines of our suburban homes in Naperville enjoying the benefits of quote safety and decent enough health and all of that process this? And what should we do, right? How should we understand it and what should we do? I think that's where you're coming from.
Yes, Prabhu. How should we process it internally, and what should we do? Because it's like, again, the feeling of helplessness, like what happened in Bangladesh, right? So it's like we cannot have our opinion, like ISKCON is worldwide. We can protest, but when you protest, then they call Hindus a terrorist, and the lives of devotees in Bangladesh are endangered, right? So it's just, what are we supposed to do? Just sit at home and just chant?
That's one way to do it. It depends on one's consciousness and one's position in society, etc. And one's varna. This question was brought up during the Vaishnava etiquette seminar, and Radhakrishna Prabhu had a beautiful response to it. At least I thought. Some people didn't like his response, but I thought it was a good response. You see, when you're very, what to say, triggered, that's the word. When you're very triggered by such circumstances, then it's hard to take a mode of goodness or even a transcendental solution. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. So, for example, if I get very upset at somebody in my family, if I'm angry and I'm just in that angry space and somebody says, just sit down and chant. To me, it's like, that's not practical. I need to fix the another person. I need to like twist their heads a little bit. So when I'm in that space of being triggered, it's very hard to accept a mode of goodness or a transcendental solution to the problem. So when we hear from devotees or we hear from the Shastra of how to approach such situations, it doesn't compute in our mind if we're triggered. And so the heart is not touched. And then bewilderment remains. Now, one may then take actual action with passion and try to fix something, do something that's, quote, practical. And actually, you can't fight violence with violence. You can't fight passion with passion. It only creates more passion and pain. So our Shastras try to give us indication of what to do in such circumstances. But for one is to first ground ourselves to a point where we are not in a triggered space. And part of the process of not being triggered is to be able to express like you're expressing, very vulnerably, very openly, very courageously. that this is this is how I'm processed. This is what's going on for me. So having a safe space where you can share that in a non-judgmental environment reduces the emotional trigger to some degree. And then once the emotional trigger is at a more sort of placid level, we can now consider our options and decide what's best. Often, those of spiritual bent will pray for the world, will pray for those specific people. And if we have faith in prayers, and we have faith that behind prayers is Krishna, then that may be sufficient. But if we're sort of if the faith is not so strong in these more subtle energies of how prayer works and how prayer can impact the world, then we may want to do something different. We want to get into the seat of a Kshatriya, of an administrator, and protect. Shat means protect. So Kshatriya is the one who protects. Let's protect the devotees. Let's protect innocent people. Let's do something, which is not bad. It's good. It's fine. It's looking for justice, etc. Yet it's advice. Okay, what's the best way to do that? Who are the best people to actually do that? I can say my nature is not to do that. I'm not going to put on a army uniform and go and protect our devotees in Bangladesh or in Kashmir. That's just not my nature. But what I can maybe do is help generations later, that through training and education, to help that people that may have gone down that path of violence and hurting one another, etc., they don't do that just by my influence of peace and calm and Krishna consciousness. So it's a very practical thing to do, is training and education, to train people in Krishna consciousness. Even it may not be people in Bangladesh, but I just train them in my little area. That's my that's my little contribution to the pain and suffering that's happening throughout the world. Part of our also we have to be careful is where identity is. In this whole episode with Bangladesh and with Kashmir, if our identity is very strongly rooted in being Indian, then we have a problem there. And we have a problem with those things. But my goodness, how much atrocity is happening in Gaza? How much atrocity is happening in the United States? How much atrocity is happening in Mexico? How much atrocity is happening in Africa and Sudan? It's just overwhelming. If you look at the news, I don't know about you, but I cry seeing some of these things that happen. 24 people is a lot in Kashmir, no doubt, no doubt. Very painful. But 24,000 people, or way more than that in Gaza, is like totally heart-shattering. And equal numbers in Sudan and other places. It's just like, oh my God, how can these things happen? So and then let's extend a little bit. What about why we stop at humans? Why not all the cows? Look at how many millions of cows are being killed every year. Maybe approaching 1 billion. I don't remember the exact numbers. So when we look at how much injustice is happening, even without the Kashmir thing, just look at animal slaughter on a beautiful day of no violence around the world. Look at our grocery stores filled with meat and pain, and how much pain is behind all that grocery store nicely packaged meat. Incredible amount of pain. So when our false ego identifies with being from a certain country or a certain nationality or a certain group of people, then that triggers us. But my goodness, this world is a dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Every second there's so much violence happening all over the world. Isn't it? And our practice is to come to this point of spiritual vision where we see that this is happening constantly. Not just to my group of people, but to all groups of people, all groups of animals. It's this kind of violence is happening constantly. So let me purify my consciousness. So may I not be violent in any way, as best as I can, even though I sometimes am, and try to spread that non-violent message and example through training and education. That's Prabhupada's method. That's our Krishna conscious method. I mean, there's many aspects to your question, honestly. There's okay, how do we understand that this happens to devotees? But it's a big topic, and honestly, a lot to say about it. But I want to be aware of the time here.
Yes, Prabhu.
I'm sorry, it may not be satisfying to you, but those are some of my contemplations anyway on these often triggering situations.
Yeah, makes sense, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. All right.
Hare Krishna.
Lakshmikant Prabhu, shall we end? Maybe he's not here. All right, devotees, thank you all very much. Wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Apologize if some of the content was a little more on the sobering side, but it is what it is. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Hare Krishna.